Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I am Bridget McNulty. I'm the co-founder of Sweet Life Diabetes Community, and I am so happy to be here with you this evening. As you will know, we are about to do an AMA and Ask Me Anything about the emotional side of diabetes. So it's really focusing on the mental health aspect of living with diabetes, both type 1 and type 2. And I've got to tell you, I am here for it. I've had such an intense week for non-diabetes related matters. But when you think about it, everything is diabetes related, right? So it's not that there's ever a time when diabetes isn't part of the mix. And I'm so happy to be here with you and to be with our amazing panelists and clinical psychologist, Daniel Scher, and get some answers to how to make life easier. Two things I wanted to say. The first is that we had a lot of questions from parents of kids with type 1 diabetes. So many questions that we're going to do a future AMA specifically for parents of kids with diabetes. And the second is that I want to say thanks to Abbott, makers of the Freestyle Libre, can't see it, here we go, for sponsoring this event and for really helping us to create the space. We went to them with this idea and they just so happily enabled us to do it. So now, last thing, a disclaimer. We are not medical professionals. Daniel is a clinical psychologist, but none of the panelists are medical professionals. Please don't change your medication without discussing it with a medical professional. Don't take our advice over your doctors. Now, I would love to introduce you to the panel and to Daniel, and then I'm going to hand over to Daniel to give us an overview of mental health and diabetes. But first, let's introduce you to our lovely panel. This is Elri, Shanae, Rian, Sane, and Sally. And we're going to give each of them an opportunity to talk about a specific aspect of their diabetes and their mental health later. And then Daniel's going to throw some words of wisdom at us, which I know we all really enjoyed last time. But for now, I'd love to hand over to Daniel, just for him to give us a bit of an overview of mental health and diabetes. Daniel is a clinical psychologist and living with type 1 diabetes, so he is a double expert in this field. Thanks for joining us, Daniel.
Thank you, Bridget, and thanks to everybody who's joined tonight. How fantastic that we're doing this again. So just quickly before we start, as Bridget said, I am a psychologist, but I am not your psychologist. So please note that, what we're giving here it may be useful, but please don't take it over your own doctor's medical advice. So to launch into some statistics, and I'm sorry to start a talk off with statistics, but there's some facts which we really need to outline at the outset of a talk like this, because these statistics are going to kind of re-emphasize to everybody the importance of conversations around diabetes and mental health care. So let me just launch into that. As many of you may well know, as people with diabetes, we are extra vulnerable to mental illness. And there are two very good reasons for that. The one, well, it's tough to have diabetes. It's a full-time occupation above and beyond, our day-to-day lives and responsibilities. But beyond that, every single diabetic will have fluctuations in blood sugar. Now, our brains run on glucose. That is the primary source of fuel for the brain. And when there are alterations in glucose, which is in the blood, so either too much or too little, going high or going low, that affects brain tissue. And those two things, the stress of having this illness and the alterations in glucose in the brain, these explain why we are more at risk of developing certain forms of mental illness. So before I move on to the good news, let me throw the bad news at you. Depression we are 2 to 3 times more likely than people without diabetes to develop full-blown clinical depression. And of course, most of us have experienced symptoms of depression, so sadness, lethargy, a loss of interest in things we enjoy. Same deal with anxiety. 1 in 5 people with diabetes experience clinically significant anxiety. So again, it's normal to be stressed out from time to time, but a full-blown anxiety disorder is a serious condition that needs serious treatment, and 1 in 5 of us meet those criteria. Then eating disorders, another very, very common condition for people with diabetes to encounter, and it's not all that surprising, is it? Given, how much we need to think about food, how much we need to regulate our dietary intake. So, for example, research has shown that women with diabetes are twice as likely as those without diabetes to have an eating disorder. Examples include anorexia, bulimia, and diabulimia, whereby a person restricts their insulin in order to lose weight. When it comes to men, there isn't really enough research for me to quote any statistics, but I can say that in my own practice, I've worked with many men who have, for example, binge eating disorder, or otherwise, body dysmorphia. It's very common when it comes to diabetes. Then substance use disorders / addiction. So because of the stress that we face having this condition, we're more vulnerable to developing, for example, a dependence on substance use. And what we also see is food addiction. I'm using inverted commas because that hasn't quite been formally recognized as an addiction. However, the dynamics that a food addict engages in are very similar to those which we would see, in the case of something like cocaine or heroin. And then emotional eating, I also like to lump into the category of addiction, even though, one can consider that to be sort of suggestive of an eating disorder. Emotional eating can have a very addictive quality, and it can wreak havoc in our management strategies. A couple of other things to be aware of. Diabetes burnout, it's very common. Most people with diabetes will encounter it at some time. The research suggests that 30% of type 1s and 20% of type 2s will encounter diabetes burnout. Then we also have other impacts such as relationship difficulties around diabetes, a denial of the condition, PTSD-like symptoms coming up, especially in relation to diagnosis or hospitalizations. And finally, cognitive difficulties. Again, that when there's too much sugar coursing through the brain, the tissue doesn't really know what to do. And we know, for example, that there's an increased risk of ADHD in people with diabetes. So now that I've scared you with the stats and the facts, let me emphasize that these conditions can be managed. And when we manage these psychiatric conditions, if we have them, in addition to diabetes, our quality of life improves, our diabetes management improves, and our prospects for living a long, healthy, and happy life improve. So I'd just like to leave you with that message. If you have these conditions, speak to somebody. You can get support. You can move forward from it, and it's definitely worth doing.
Thank you so much, Daniel. And while I will say that was a fairly depressing roundup, it's also just so helpful to have it named, right? Like emotional eating. I didn't know that was a thing. I can definitely recognize that is sometimes a thing, but I didn't. There's something about being able to name a problem and also to know that it's common that really just helps. So thank you. And I just want to say to everyone here, this is such a safe space. You can ask us any questions. If we don't get to them this evening, we will definitely respond to them tomorrow, and feel free to chat to each other in the chat too. This is really just a safe space for us all to be able to connect and discuss what living with diabetes is really like, not what it looks like on the cover. So first I'm going to bring in Sali, and Sali is going to tell us a little bit about his experience with living with type 1 and specifically about living with a partner and partners who understand or don't understand how you feel with diabetes. Thanks for joining us, Sali.
Hi, Bridget. Thank you for introducing me in that way. If I speak from the heart, and Daniel's actually, his profession helps us a lot. And me, I've been through 2 marriages already. And it was difficult because they did not understand diabetes. I mean, we got married and I was already a diabetic. And you actually, when going into the marriage, in fact, I wasn't actually very open about my conditions, but they didn't have the background on how to handle a diabetic. Yeah, the mood swings, like Daniel was saying, the emotional demands of diabetes, it puts a lot of stress on your relationship. And a chronic disease is not very easy. I mean, for myself, I mean, I have to really take care of everything. I mean, even at this moment now, I've become a diabetic amputee. So my baggage has actually become more. I have to see to me injecting myself. First of all, testing my sugar, injecting myself, putting on my prosthetic leg, moving around. So your independence is there, but if you don't have the understanding from a partner that can actually support you, then actually becomes emotionally stressful. And the waking up at night, actually, it's not they always say that it's not a burden, but you can actually see it. And with technology, I mean, with the alarms going off and waking them up at night, these are all the tensions that build up between you and your partner or wife. And then if you actually engage in a party or something and you indulge in a little bit of cake or, it's always, if something goes wrong, the blame game. So this is the battle which you always have with your partner if they don't understand. And if you try to educate them, and there's that barrier which they've actually put forth where they don't want to know anything about diabetes. So when the complications come, they blame you. So the support, the sympathy, it's not that we want sympathy, Bridget, it is something that it's just the understanding. Sometimes if I don't want to get up on a weekend, if I'm not feeling well, it is something that they don't understand. So
I know. And it's so hard too, because the chronicness of a chronic condition, it's such an easy phrase, right? To say, oh, I have a chronic condition. But it's the fact that we never get a holiday. Like you never get a day off where you don't have to think about this stuff. And that words aren't enough to describe what a low feels like and what a high feels like and what a roller coaster day feels like and what that does to your energy. And so I think even when partners are well-meaning, it's like being on two islands and there's an uncrossable bridge of water in between, and because they can't feel what you're feeling. I've often thought it would be so great if someone could just like reach out, touch your arm, and then be able to feel what your body is feeling at that time, because it would make things so much easier. Thank you so much for sharing, Sally. It's so helpful.
And just one last thing is, we shouldn't be shy to actually seek for help. I mean, on Monday, I've got an appointment with my psychologist, and
great.
There we go.
Awesome. I think it's so powerful because it's empowering, right? It's the same as going to see the podiatrist to make sure your feet are right and going to see the ophthalmologist to check your eyes. It's an integral part of diabetes care. Yeah, thank you. Next, I'm going to ask Shanae to come and speak to us. She's going to be speaking about diabetes in the workplace. So how do we bring diabetes across to our colleagues and at our companies? How do we let them know how specially to treat us or not to treat us specially? Thank you so much for joining us, Shanae.
Thanks, Bridget. Hi, everyone. So I am currently a working girl. I've been diabetic for 12 years. I'm 27 now. And I can tell you from my experience that it is important for your employer to know that you are type 1 diabetic for many different reasons. I mean, we spend most of our time working at the workplace, and it's important for at least someone to know that you are type 1 diabetic. In case something happens during the work hours, it is important that they understand your basic needs as someone with a chronic condition. And I believe that only you can help them to understand what you need as a type 1 diabetic. For example, snacking on sweets during a meeting, short breaks to administer insulin when needed, and to put time aside if a low sugar is experienced, and of course, work schedules. I actually took it a step further by picking 2 colleagues that I'm quite close to, that I'm comfortable with, besides my manager, and I gave them basically like a type 1 diabetic rundown of what they can do, what to look out for, what to do when I'm in need of someone to assist me. It made me feel comfortable, safe, and it took pressure off from hiding the fact that nobody knows. I have to keep this to myself. It's a lot of stress while you're at work. And like you said, Bridget, being type 1 diabetic, we can't run away from that. We come to you with that. That's who we are. And with my experience, I believe that it really helped me to let a few people know. Not everybody on the floor needs to know your intricate detail of your illness, but I do think it's important that a few key people know. And I even had that in school. We were 5 best friends, and I became type 1 diabetic at school, at high school. And it was the 5 of them that were very kind enough to want to know what is going on. They wanted to know, what does this mean? How can we help you? I even had one friend that had a reminder on her phone every single day: take your insulin before second break. And that wasn't really her responsibility, but it showed me that not everybody is going to look at you funny and not want to be part of it. My experience was at the same time that people were curious, I got to teach people about the illness, and I made a lot of people aware. And so my experience is, in the workplace, it's important that at least a few people know. They're not going to bombard you with questions. It's just in case you're not feeling well. My manager is really a great person. She can see, she can even tell when something is wrong. And it's just that comfort knowing that, because she knows, I can tell her comfortably without being worried that she's going to think of me in a different kind of way. But I do believe that only I could make her understand it in that way. If she didn't know, she would just assume that, okay, you're taking a few days off, or what's going on. She would be confused.
Or you like snacking all the time.
You're snacking all the time. What's going on? You lose them to their own imagination. But when you fill them in a little bit, and I do think it's got to do with you being confident. Every type 1 diabetic is different, but I never really had a problem with sharing it with a few close people. So I just had 2 people at my work that knew. They knew I was type 1 diabetic. They knew what to look out for. Some of them even had sweets in their drawer. That made me feel comfortable on the work, on the floor. That really helped a lot, Bridget.
And I love what you've done there also, because it hasn't been like it's not a big rah-rah thing, right? You're not coming in and saying, I'm so special, everyone stop, listen to me, I'm so special. It's like a carefully structured way. You've chosen 2 people that you know you can connect with and that will understand and that won't make a big fuss. The going low in meetings thing is such a thing. I know Kirsten mentioned it earlier, but I've had it before, especially with Zoom calls when you're supposed to be presenting something, because there's nowhere to hide. Like, at least in real life, we could have been like, oh, I need to go to the bathroom and eat something. But on Zoom calls, you've got to like mute and switch off if you want to be chomping on the side. Thank you, Shanae. I think it's so helpful to hear what's worked for you too.
Thank you. Thanks.
Great. Yeah. Next, I'm going to ask Rian to join us. He's going to be talking about the chain effect of heart health and mental health leading to diabetes burnout. Thank you so much for joining us, Rian.
Thank you, Bridget. I've been celebrating, if I can call it a celebration this year, of 20 years of living with diabetes.
Amazing.
I don't want to scare people in general, but the dangerous chain that runs with diabetes is definitely mental health,
Mm.
And I'm going to talk a bit further about my mental health, and then also the scary thought of the chain that runs with diabetes in heart health that I've gone through in my life experience and stuff, living with diabetes. First of all, I was diagnosed with diabetes in 2001, being a typical 27-year-old Afrikaner white male. I didn't take it seriously, and lived my life, carrying on, going through, this living with it, and I can beat it, and I will live with it with a bit of oral medication. As time progressed, the chain changed, and I had to go on to insulin in 2007. Carry on, carry on. Then a few life experiences happened with, death in family, and then, the shock came and stuff where in 2012, I suffered my first heart attack because of the
Oh,
run of the management of my diabetes, linked
sure.
with that, hypertension and stuff. So the chain links. So it's important to have a look at your chain of events happening.
Yeah.
And that played a critical part after the heart attack. I can also share it was my first heart attack and stuff. It ran further and stuff where the emotional side went roller coaster. Typical male again. I would take myself off my antidepressants because of medical scheme red types, and then
Yeah.
go the same roller thing. And it's a dangerous thing. You just want to lie in your bed and don't want to function at all.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
influence your family where they get angry at you and they don't understand. So it's a very dangerous chain of where it runs.
Yeah.
And that's where also it came in. I realized and stuff, especially of last year, in the run on to with the whole COVID running a year and a bit, I
Yeah.
went into a terrible phase and stuff where I had to dip in my depression, and I told a government doctor that I'm contemplating suicide that I've done in the past. So I can open up about suicide a few years ago. Irony, with my own insulin, I overdosed myself to just say I've had enough of the chain of diabetes and what it's doing to me emotionally.
Sure. And then what happened?
And
You were
then
obviously fine.
carrying on to last year and stuff. The shock came and stuff where I was diagnosed with bipolar mood, and I always wondered why I was so manic. Then I'm on a high, then I'm on a low,
Yeah.
and it played mind games with me that I thought, okay, with the treatment now of the going into being suicidal,
Sure.
that shock came in with the system and stuff. So I had to really learn and be careful and stuff, and about the whole emotional roller coaster that the chain causes and stuff. I left, my mental side was much more stable, and then boom, the second chain of shock came when I suffered my second heart attack towards the end of last year and
Gosh,
stuff.
that's a
And
lot.
I can just preach, don't take diabetes for granted. It will eat you and, sorry for my language, bite you in the butt.
Yeah.
But how dangerous it is. I always thought in the beginning, the first signs they told me I must go to the ophthalmologist because there's cataracts and stuff. It's not really part of diabetes but all, and it will carry on.
Yeah.
Happy-go-lucky.
Thank you so much for sharing, Bjorn. And also thank you for talking about it, because I know that contemplations of suicide are fairly common among people with diabetes, because we're injecting a lethal substance in controlled portions usually. But it's also so helpful to be able to hear the perspective of someone living with type 2, because before this, our panelists have only ever had type 1. And I do think there's like a whole different bouquet of things that are difficult about living with type 2, because you're not forced to have to change your life right in the beginning. You're kind of told, oh, off you go and change your diet and you'll be fine. And so it can be easy to not think it's as serious. That's so helpful. Thank you very much for sharing.
Thank you.
I want to I want to bring up Ellery next, talking about how to cope with extreme anxiety when it comes to food, which is actually what Daniel was talking about earlier. So thank you so much for joining us, Ellery.
Hi, Bridget. Thank you for having me. Hi, everyone. Okay, so I've been a type 1 diabetic for almost 35 years now.
Sure.
I was diagnosed at 10 months old. Through my childhood, teens, everything, I've always struggled with food. At one stage in primary school, I stopped eating. It was quite a thing. My aunt, and well, not my blood relative aunt and uncle, but the people that looked after me had to force feed me because I just refused to eat.
Goodness.
And going past that, it got better. I started eating regularly again, but got to high school, and I always had this constant struggle with I would have something to eat afterwards. I will feel so guilty because I know I'm not supposed to have it.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, going forward, that at this moment I struggle with extreme anxiety, as you said, and it's very difficult to tell people about, or not tell people about it, but to explain it. There's the word. Sorry, my English is failing me a bit here.
No.
It's difficult to explain to someone the feelings and everything you go through, and I don't think we've talked about this enough, because I'm sure there's more people that has the same situation or something that I struggle with that they struggle with. So at this point, I'm working very close together with my psychologist and a dietitian to help me through this, because like you said, we don't get a break from this. It's 24/7, 365 days a year. There's no holiday. And it's just a thing of, when I finished breakfast, I'm already thinking about what am I going to have for lunch. When I'm done with lunch, what I'm going to have for dinner. How much did I inject? Why is my sugar level? What did I eat? It's ridiculous. So I'm glad Daniel brought it up. I am an emotional eater as well. When I stress, I eat, and not something specifically. I just eat whatever I can get my hands on. And also, I didn't know this was a thing, but you can be addicted to food. And getting to that point where it was actually like spoken and named, I was like, oh, thank you. Somebody understands this. Somebody understands me. I'm not going entirely mad, because I was like, how can you be addicted to food? But you can. It's not fake. It's real, and it's happening. It's happening to me, and it's a real big struggle. But I've come to realize that I need to get help, and I need to. I work together, obviously, with my endocrinologist as well. I see him twice a year, and with him and the psychologist and the dietitian, I'm sure I will get out the other way quite fine. But yeah, it's a real struggle.
So great that you've got a whole team helping you too, because I think it's so easy, because diabetes is so stuck in our heads so much of the time. It's so easy to think that because the conversations and the maths and the thinking and the planning is stuck in our heads, that the solution has to come from inside our heads too. And so it's so wonderful that you've reached out to get help, especially from professionals who will be able to help with tangible, actual things.
Yeah, my husband is a superhero. I mean, I couldn't ask for a better partner to stand with me and help me. And he really tries his absolute best. And yes, I do get in trouble sometimes where he tells me, you can't have that. You can't have chocolate all the time. But at least I have that, and I'm very lucky to have that. But I have gone and actually written down once a calculation of my lunch. And when I looked at it afterwards, I'm like, I sucked at maths in school.
I know. There's no option of sucking at maths.
You do this like every day. And I actually posted a picture about it. I'm like, guys, look at this. Like, what am I doing here?
I know. It was so interesting, because we're doing a 2022 journal with Abbott, the same as the 2021 we did this year. But this year's was on the emotional side, and it was with Daniel, who helped us with clinical psychologist. And next year's we've specifically looked at behavior change. And so it's on like how to look at behaviors that you have and how, like, small actionable ways to change them. But I sat down with a doctor in behavior change to ask for tips. And I was explaining it to him, and I could see his face just be like, but you never get to just not think about what you eat. We were specifically talking about food. And one of his suggestions, which I loved and which we put in, is that you give yourself 10 free passes at the beginning of the year, and you mark them in the diary, in the journal. And then at 10 times throughout the year, you could be like, this is it. I'm getting an ice cream sundae. And obviously you inject for it, and obviously you test afterwards. Like you don't do stupid things. You eat some protein with it. You are kind to yourself, but it's like a guilt-free pass. And I love that idea. Mine are all going to be ice cream 10 times.
Well, then next year, 2022 will be the year to get back on track with it.
I know. Thank you so much for sharing, Ellery. Our last panelist is Sunny, last but not least, and she is going to be talking about the fear of complications, the blame and shame we so often feel around diabetes risks. Thank you so much for being here, Sunny.
Hey, Bridget. Hey, everyone. So I have been diabetic for 25 years. Actually, I was diagnosed in September 1996. And at the time, I was the only 7-year-old that I knew who had diabetes, because I always associated it with my grandparents, because my grandmothers on both sides had diabetes. So for me, I just didn't understand why I didn't seem to be doing things okay, like they seem to be living their best life, so to speak. So I owned it. And literally lived in my head, to the point that I felt that nobody else around me understood. And whenever I had to go for a checkup or I was in and out of hospital, I always felt as though I was being shouted at for the fact that my sugars are not in range, my sugars are not good. And being diagnosed at 7 years old, you also get told about everything that could go wrong. You could lose a limb, you could go blind, you could get this and that, you won't be able to have a baby, etc., etc. I've got a 2-year-old now. She's
proving them wrong.
So I proved them wrong, I suppose. But as you grow up, or as you're trying to navigate life, your teen years and so on, and not always having sugars in range, it really takes a toll on you, because you always constantly blaming yourself for not having what is perceived as good sugars. And also,
nobody has sugar in range all the time. It's impossible. But that's not
getting told that you should have them between 4 and 7, and this is what you should wake up with, and whatever else. And so it became a thing that stays in your mind, and you're trying to just try to get in control. But it also develops a fear. Well, for me, it developed a fear of speaking out when things were not going right. So when I was 12 years old, my eyesight started deteriorating. And I was scared to speak up to my parents to say that, guys, I can't see, my eyes are going bad, because already I'm like, oh my word, I am actually living the bad side of diabetes.
The horror story.
Guys, what else is going to come next? So I had my first operation when I was 12 years old. I couldn't do homework the one day. I couldn't see the math sum, and for the first time, I got in trouble at school because I didn't do my homework. And that triggered a teacher writing a letter to my parents to say, go get her eyes tested. And that's what we did. Went to Specsavers. They said, no, this is beyond us. You need to actually go to a specialist. You need to go to an ophthalmologist and get tested properly. That happened. I had to get laser treatment done in both eyes. And after that as well, I've had numerous other processes done to my eyes. And I think then I started understanding the need for me to speak out about what I'm struggling with before it gets to a point where it's irreversible. Understanding the relationship between your HbA1c and the rest of your body, saying that if it gets higher, it means that we're not controlling it correctly, and it doesn't have to be perfect, but it needs to be controlled so that we're able to stop certain things from happening. And because you are able to stop certain things if you manage your sugar correctly.
Yeah.
That fear again steps in, because I didn't want to know what else could go wrong. So as I said, I was diagnosed in 1996, but I only went for my first podiatrist appointment when it was 2012. 2012 was the first time I went to a podiatrist to get my feet tested and all of that. And I think I fully took ownership of my diabetes in 2015 when I moved out of home, and I had to be accountable for everything, where mom and dad couldn't come and save me. Mom and dad couldn't rush me to hospital and so on and so forth. I actually went and I got myself an endocrinologist when I moved to Cape Town, and we started monitoring my sugars. Initially, we started with 4 visits in a year, and now we're at 2 visits because we're understanding the relationship. I'm also asking questions. I'm also understanding the relationship between my insulin, the food, my activities, my body, how my body changes. And I'm also okay with the fact that it's not always going to be perfect because I'm manually managing what everybody else's bodies are doing automatically. So it's a continuous journey, and you need to, like everybody has said, be bold enough to speak about what you're struggling with. And I think that what's also led me to open the social media accounts that I had, to just get a community where I can be like, yo guys, today I'm just sitting at a 13 the whole day, and this is what I've been doing. And then I get somebody else saying that they're also going through that, and I'm just like, okay, it's okay, calm down, it's okay. You're doing the best that you can.
And it just makes such a difference. Same thing for me. It makes such a difference knowing that other people are going through it, and that you're not the only one who is having these crazy thoughts or who has had to deal with these things. But it also makes such a difference when you can understand it more. To me, the thing that drives me the most insane, and it happens fairly often, is when I do the same thing 2 days in a row, the same thing, as same as possible 2 days in a row, and the numbers are totally different. I played this game with my husband the other night. We were going to bed, and I was like, let's play a little game called Choose the Ending for Diabetes. And I was like, this is what happened last night. This is what happened the night before. What do you think is going to happen tonight? And he predicted something. And I was like, who knows? We'll know in the morning, I guess. But I must admit that's where the Libra has helped me so much, because before I would just be guessing and be like, well, I think this is what's going on. And being able to see that graph is just such a relief to me, because at least you can say like, okay, well, I see when I took my insulin, or I see when I ate, and this is why this is happening a little bit. One last thing I want to say, and then I'm going to hand over to Daniel to give us some real professional advice. Oh, Wendy, what a lovely message. Thank you. You're definitely not alone. We are all in this together. My dad has always had high cholesterol. And when I was growing up, he used to eat cheese only when my mom wasn't looking. And he was convinced that if she didn't see him eating the cheese, then it didn't count. And I was like, no, bro, that's not how it works. But it's the same thing as I was only diagnosed much later, so I didn't live at home when I was diagnosed. But I imagine if your parents have looked after your diabetes for so many years, it must almost feel like, well, if they can't see it, then it's not happening, I imagine. So I think you guys are amazing. 25 years. What did you do to celebrate? Oh, come on, Sunny. You got to do something.
I don't want to put a chat.
Tomorrow's October.
Tell you what I did. I took a stand, and I'm hoping that it affects other diabetics in a positive way. That's how I celebrated.
That's true. Sunny made a video. For those who didn't see it, please go and look on our page or on her page, speaking out to FedHealth and saying, come on, guys, this isn't good enough. You should be covering diabetes tech. And it resulted in a meeting with the CEO at FedHealth, which is moving things forward. So yay, Sunny. That is a great way to celebrate 25 years.
Yeah, I think so too.
Okay. Yeah, that gets a 10 out of 10. Daniel, please, can you come and give us some professional advice, feedback? What you got for us? I mean, five therapy sessions in 5 minutes. All the best.
Thank you, Bridget. This is an unenviable task, because I don't know if I can add much more wisdom to what we've just witnessed here. I mean, look, think about the collective years of personal diabetes experience that we just tapped into in the last 20 minutes. It's huge. And, you know, I can say I work with diabetics most of the day. I've had diabetes most of my life. And even in this conversation, I'm learning new things. So before I try to, add a little bit to what was said here, firstly, thank you to everybody who really dug deep. I mean, there were some really heartfelt expressions of the struggles that so many of us feel, and just so awesome to be a part of this, so empowering. So thank you deeply to all of you for opening up in the way that you did. I think... So maybe I'll just run through one by one. So, Sally, just starting with your awesome act of opening up about the struggles of navigating this illness, this condition while also trying to balance that with partners who at times aren't entirely understanding or empathic. I mean, it's such a big struggle. So many people encounter that, and it's such an important thing to think about. You know, there's a meme that's been going around in therapy circles. Some of you might have seen it. It says something along the lines of, people in therapy spend that time talking about the people in their lives who need therapy but won't take responsibility and go to therapy. My goodness, is that true? It really, I think it will resonate for a lot of people what you're saying. And I think what I was hearing in some of the accounts that you gave, it's almost like sometimes some partners will separate the diabetes out from us and just put it on the side and pretend it's not there. But that's not a relationship, is it? Because, I mean, we know this condition isn't going anywhere. This condition is a part of our identity. And if our partner is separating that very important part out from us, then that represents something that really needs to be addressed. So I'm really pleased you shone light on that. It's super relevant. So thank you, Sally. Much appreciated.
No, thanks, Dan.
Cool.
Thanks.
And Shanae, also, I'm also really glad that you brought up the matter of diabetes in the workplace, because this is something which comes up incredibly frequently in my own practice. And, you know, especially in our demographic, 20s, 30s, 40s, we're working hard to establish ourselves within our respective professions. And again, you can't really separate that aspect of our identities out from our functioning in a workplace where we are spending the majority of our waking lives. And I think it's so cool how you highlighted the fact that only you can communicate this to them. Now, that's the first step, and it's a vital step. I agree with you. If we're able to do that, that then opens up, you know, opportunities for empowerment, for connection, for understanding, and of course, it's pretty vital for safety. Having said that, you know, we do know that a lot of people struggle with feelings of shame, as Sunny touched on, which can really make it difficult to speak out in that way. So I wanted to congratulate you and thank you for, you know, demonstrating to others that it can be done with style and confidence. And again, it's a really important thing for us to be thinking about.
Yeah. Thanks, Daniel.
Cool.
That's such an interesting way of putting it, Daniel, that you can't separate that part of you out at work, because that's where the trouble comes in, right? You're pretending to be someone that you're not. And so then that means all day at work, you have to have this like different face on of someone who isn't doing all the mental maths and having to think about food and needing to have snacks and needing to inject and all of that. And then you end your day and you're even more fatigued than you would be juggling a chronic condition, because you're juggling a chronic condition and having to put on an act all day. I hadn't thought about that. Exhausting.
Absolutely. Because, I mean, you're absolutely right. You're doing your work to the best of your abilities. You're managing your condition, and you've now taken on the additional job of hiding how difficult that is from the people around you. It's a lot. And, you know, like you were saying, it's like a
triple job.
Triple job, exactly.
Yeah.
It really is. And like you were saying, you know, when you start to go low in a meeting and you think, okay, it's going to be less disruptive at this moment for me to just push through, even though it's creeping down, rather than eat. And look, I understand that. I've been there, but it's unfortunate that then your productivity, your efficiency at doing what you do needs to suffer. Whereas if we can communicate in the way that Shanae did, I suppose that can create space in which we don't need to make that sacrifice.
Absolutely. I'm seeing all the questions come in, and we are going to get to them if we can. I see there's a lot of questions of parents with kids with diabetes, and so we suspected that we should do a session on that later, and we will definitely do that. And Tamara's just asked if we could do a session on diabetes tech, which can support diabetes management. That's a great idea. We hadn't thought about that. We're always very open to any ideas about what future sessions we could do. But now, Daniel, back to your one minute therapizing. This should be like a TV show, like Dragon's Den, where you have to pitch your job in 1 hour. This is where you have to somehow cram therapy into 1 minute.
Yeah, it's a challenging task.
Yeah.
I'm open to it though. So moving on to Rian. Yeah, again, thank you. That was a heartfelt and honest account. And honestly, I can tell you right now that there are so many people in this chat who resonated with your experiences. You know, whereby we've got physical health conditions, we've got mental health conditions, and the chain between the two of them, it just fuels that fire. It gets worse, and suddenly you just feel overwhelmed, you feel helpless. And of course, there's the additional bipolar in the mix. I mean, so we're counting up the jobs that you had to take care of there, and it's massive. And really, I can absolutely assure you, and I say this from personal experience with many people who have diabetes that I work with, and with reference to the statistics, the research that's been done, suicidal thoughts are very, very common in people who have a chronic condition, in people who experience life stress. And it's so, so important for us to be normalizing it in the way that you did, because I can guarantee that there are a lot of people on this chat who have been there. And just seeing you own it in that way, I'm hoping is going to make some of the people here feel more comfortable about reaching out for help when they need to in that way. So thank you again.
And also, you look amazing for having had a heart attack at the end of last year.
Wonders to a cardiologist that does his wonders.
Yeah. Give that cardiologist a raise.
That's amazing.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
Cool. And Elri, yes, food anxiety. You're so right, hey? And also props and respect to you for leaning on your team. For having a psychologist, not enough people these days who have diabetes are advised to do that. I'm a bit biased here, but geez, I must say, when I was growing up, I really wish that there'd been more discourse around diabetes psychology and more advice from endocrinologists and doctors to reach out for help, because back in those days, it wasn't really a thing.
I feel like back in 2 years ago, it wasn't even a thing. I remember on Diabetic South Africans, we posted something like, "How's your mental health?" Probably 2 years ago, like before COVID. So, in the before time. And I remember you commenting on it, Daniel, and saying, "I'm so pleased to hear this question being asked because we weren't talking about it." And that was only 2 years ago. And maybe COVID brought it into the spotlight. I don't know. But yeah, I'm so impressed. And a psychologist dietitian combo, that's like the sucker punch. That was called double punch. Oh yeah, I can imagine.
It's for my health.
Yeah, no, it's so important. The more you can lean on the people around you, the more you can lean on the support team that you construct for yourself, the easier it's all going to be. And just to touch on the awesome question that you alluded to, which you probably will hear from people, how can you be addicted to food? How can you be addicted to something natural? And I'm with you. We can definitely develop addictive-like / compulsive behaviors in relation to food. And it makes sense, right? I often say this to the people who I work with. If you think about what food means to us, what's our first experience with food? You're a baby, right? You don't understand what's happening. You don't understand your existence. But suddenly there's this thing in your belly, hunger, and it feels like it's eating you from the inside. And then all of a sudden, something out there, this nice mom, works out that you're in distress and you don't know what's happening, but suddenly you're breastfeeding. So you've got the warmth of mom, you've got safety, you've got attachment, and that growling thing in your stomach stops. So right from the beginning,
Sounds lovely.
So it makes sense, right? That when you're stressed out, that's one of the things we're going to go for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. So thank you.
I'm not.
You're welcome.
I was going to make a bad joke about breastfeeding in adults. I'm not going to do that. Trying to tone down my off-color humor when I'm on a public call. Thanks, Elri.
Cool. And lastly, Sunny, again, hey, wow, it's so cool that you were able to open up about the shame and the blame that you felt, which stopped you from getting the help that you really needed. Now, it's not unusual for that sort of thing to happen in younger people. And you were, geez, what a tough age to go through all of that. And it's so easy, right, to feel, okay, I'm developing complications. This means I've messed up. This means I'm not doing diabetes properly. I'm a bad diabetic. I've failed. I'm disappoint people who are supporting me. There's so much emotional baggage around something like that. And the fact that you are able to reach out at that age is big, because, you know, adults struggle with that as well, except it's not a matter of reaching out to your parents. It's a matter of connecting with the reality of the situation within yourself. And that's where we see denial about what you're struggling with, denial about the condition, denial about avoidance of self-care. So it's the same dynamic that a lot of adults face. And I really hope that those in this group who kind of resonate with your experience are able to reach within themselves or without themselves, as in this community, to be able to move forward like you did.
I think it's so helpful that we have this community too. I know that, like, we're all sick of screens and Facebook is the devil and all that jazz, except that it's given us this, which is just wonderful and didn't exist before. So Anne's just asked a question that ties into one of the questions that was asked last time that I promised we would answer this time. She said, how can I convince my newly diagnosed preteen that type 1 is nothing to be ashamed of or shy about? There's no need to hide it. And the question I was about to ask you is, how do you tell people you have diabetes? So maybe you could give us like a combo pack on how to talk about having diabetes without shame and without feeling shy.
Sure. I mean, it's a really important question to be thinking about, and not one to which there is necessarily a straightforward answer.
Okay.
Because let's think about it. For preteens, for teens, the biggest fear is of being different, of being deficient. And that is a concern that people without diabetes carry and need to find ways of working through as well.
Yeah.
And there's no real guidebook for doing that. It works in different ways for different people. But what we do know is that having diabetes really amplifies the sense of, I'm different, I'm flawed, I'm going to fail, I'm not going to survive this, etc. And look, if those difficulties with connecting and owning with where you're at are stopping your preteen from looking after their diabetes, then it's important to get some professional help there. And that can be tricky because preteens often don't want to be seeing a therapist or a counselor or talking to their doctor about these things. But what we're talking about there is denial, which is bordering on possible diabetes burnout, and that requires treatment. However, another thing which I find to be probably the most powerful intervention for people in that situation is exactly the kind of thing that we're doing here, connecting with your community. Yeah. When it comes to the younger ones, when they're able to connect with other people their age and to see other people with
Youth with diabetes is amazing for that.
Yes, absolutely.
They run camps, or they at least have like closed groups where you can like chat to other people who are the same age, or you can ask them to connect you with people of a similar age in your area. Because I think it's also just, I remember when I was first, I was 25, but when I was first diagnosed, it was not a club I wanted to join, because my images in my head of people with diabetes were like pale, sickly kids, and I didn't want to be part of that. And so I think also if like preteens can see that there are other people like them and cool kids like us, maybe not us, we're like 2 decades too old. And how do you in general, how do you tell people you have diabetes? Are there any magic tips? And when?
And when? Look, it's a big question, and it really depends on the circumstances that we're talking about. So, the kind of conversation that you're going to have there is going to differ depending on whether this is your partner, your parent, your child, your employer, your friend, or someone that you just started dating, for example. All of these different relationships, connections require different levels of conversation. And that's probably the first thing you want to look at. Who am I telling? What is the purpose of this conversation?
Yeah.
And from there, I mean, look, there's no hard or fast way of how to do that. what is most important is to think about finding a way to do it which feels right for you. And that looks different for different people. For some people, it's a very gentle conversation in which you gradually broach the topic and help the person to understand where you're at. For others, it's a matter of loud and proud. This is what it is. If
whipping out a pen at a dinner table.
Yes, exactly. And that's another nice one. It takes the pressure. If you're not like a verbal person and you don't want to have this complex, abstract conversation, just whip out the pen and see what the response is. It's definitely one.
My brother I have 3 older brothers, and one of them has a needle phobia. And for years, every time I injected, he'd be like, "Oh, I need you to go away." And I was like, "Get over it, buddy. Like, it's not going anywhere. You have to get over it, because I'm not going to get over it." Okay, I've got one more question, and then we're going to have like 2 minutes more to talk about burnout, because there's a bunch of burnout questions. I'd love to talk about, this was Tavo's question from last time, and I don't know the answer. How do I deal with people reducing my disease to something not so serious? And I think that's fascinating, because I think often the reaction is the other way, right? Like, someone hears you have diabetes and they're like, "Oh, you can't eat anything. You have to be wrapped in cotton wool." What about when people don't take it seriously? And actually that's linked to Lorena's question, because she was just asking about how you explain to someone who doesn't know anything about diabetes, how do you explain what burnout is? So when people aren't giving us the support we need, what do we do?
Yeah. So, okay, look, that can be a massive issue if we're talking about our close relationships, our family relationships. If you're not getting that understanding from your partner, from your parent, from your child, from your whoever it is that is meant to be supporting you in that way, that's significant, and that needs to be addressed. Again, there are no hard and fast rules, but communication is key here. Ideally, one wants to carve out some time in which you try to help them understand what this means and why it's so significant. And if after having done
that kind of pisses me off, though, that I have to do the work in that situation too.
Right.
Pisses me off on Tavo's behalf.
Exactly. And it should piss you off, because it's problematic. And what we need, is for our loved ones to connect with the pissed offness that we feel as well. Because again, we can't compartmentalize diabetes out as this other thing which we can just leave to the side and pretend it doesn't exist. It's our lifestyle, it's our identity. Even, not to say that we are only our diabetes, but we can't avoid it. We need to confront it. And
it has such an impact on every aspect of our lives, physically, mentally, emotionally. It's like knotted in there with all of it.
Right. It's inevitable that it's going to come up and it needs to be addressed. But look, some people also struggle in terms of coming to terms what it means for their loved one to have this condition. And because of that, they might minimize, they might avoid, they might deflect. And in those kind of situations, it can be useful to think about bringing on somebody else who can help facilitate that conversation.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Definitely useful.
Like a third neutral party.
Precisely. Somebody impartial, someone who has good communication skills and who can help the conversation go in a way in which emotions aren't flaring up and each party is understanding one another.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I've got a last impossible double-header question for you, because I'm cognizant that it's almost 8 o'clock and we don't want to keep people too long. So Lorena's asked, how can you assist someone going through burnout if they don't realize they're going through it? Right at the beginning of the chat, someone asked if it's possible for the partners of people with diabetes to also get diabetes burnout, which I had never considered before, but makes a lot of sense. So those kind of speak to the same thing for me, because it's talking about like a burnout situation where the person themselves is not saying, "Hold the phone, I'm going through diabetes burnout," but you can sense that they are. How do you deal with that? Just an impossible question to end us off.
Yeah, wow, you're not making this easy for me, are you?
No. With all 10 seconds warning.
Okay. Let me start with the easier part of the question, and it's easier because there's research on that. Yes, partners of people do get diabetes burnout. I don't remember the statistic offhand, but it's significant. I imagine that my wife can attest to that. The partners of many people here probably can as well. But it is a real thing. And I guess, it's a tricky thing here, because one of the aspects of diabetes burnout is denial. Denial of diabetes, denial of burnout. It's not easy to convince somebody that they are suffering from something which they don't believe that they have. But a really good way to start that conversation is to do so with curiosity. So if you pick up that there is an emotion which might signal burnout, those emotions, hopelessness, frustration, despair, exhaustion, sadness, low motivation, irritability. If you're picking up on one of those, use that as a way to be curious. Ask a question. It feels like you're feeling this way. What are you feeling right now? What's making you feel this way? Put on your therapist's hat and play around with it. It really is just a matter of opening up a conversation around those difficult emotions, which can then it really makes it easier to start talking about, okay, so we've got these feelings, how can we support you with them?
It's so funny, because someone said to me the other day, we're getting such lovely comments coming in, thank you everyone. Someone said to me the other day they were really pissed off with their husband about something, and instead of making it antagonistic, which is easy to do when you are in a partnership, she thought, how would I react if this was a friend, if a friend had done the same thing? And it enabled her to open up in like a much warmer kind of way. And this feels very similar to me. So instead of being like, oh, you're exhausted of diabetes. Well, imagine actually having diabetes. Do you know how exhausting it is to actually have it? Which would potentially be my first response. It's nice to approach it with, as you say, that sense of curiosity, because it kind of softens the whole thing, which is lovely. Yeah. We are out of time. How are we out of time already? So I want to do 2 quick pieces of housekeeping, and then I'd love to bring all our panelists back on stage to say goodbye. Thanks again to Abbott, the makers of the Freestyle Libre, for sponsoring this event and helping us create this lovely space. Also, I just love it because for the last hour, I've been checking my glucose every few seconds, and no one can even tell. Check, just did it now. No one even knows. And then we want you to save the date, please. Sunday, the 14th of November is World Diabetes Day, and we have got such a good idea. It wasn't mine. If it was mine, I would take full credit. Diabetes is often so serious. Case in point, we are all dealing with so much, but there's also a lighter side to it. So this year we are going to dance for diabetes. So at 12 o'clock on Sunday, the 14th of November, it can be a chair dance, it can be a standing up dance, it can be break dancing and doing the worm if you want to. Between 12 and 12:20, we are all going to join on the World's Giantest Zoom call. You can pick your own songs and mute your mics so that everyone can be, mute your mics so everyone can be dancing together. We'll share all the details later. I just wanted to make sure you had it in your diaries, and invite all your friends 20 minutes before lunch, so then you can have a delicious lunch afterwards. Once again, a disclaimer. Daniel is a professional clinical psychologist, but this was general advice. None of us are medical specialists. Please don't adjust your medication based on anything you heard. Please, can all our panelists come back on stage? And I just want to say thank you to all of you for being here, and thank you to this community for being here and for sharing your comments and your questions, and for all of you, to Daniel, Sally, Sunny, Elri, Shanae, and Rian for being so honest and open and vulnerable about what it's really like to live with diabetes, because the more we talk about it, the easier it gets. Hey, we are all in this together. Thank you so much, everyone, and we look forward to the next one.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.